4 young Palestinian men, friends of mine, invited me out for an afternoon to have some tea in one of the restaurants. I arrived there, and one of them looked at me and he said, "Ravi, can I tell you a little story?" He said, "A famous Bible speaker by the name of Brother Andrew was here some time ago. And I was sitting at a table with Brother Andrew and a leading mullah, leading sheikh. And they were very cordially talking to each other. And he said, it was a tense time here. He said the Israelis in some activity had killed about 4 Palestinians. And at the instruction of this particular sheikh, 8 Israelis were ordered killed, and that was carried out. So he said, I'm sitting here at a very tense time with an even more tense conversation. For one of them was involved in this act. And he said, I watched as Brother Andrew and he spoke. And Brother Andrew leaned forward and said to him, Sheikh, can I ask you a question? Who made you the judge of this world, or the executioner to this world? Who made you the executioner to this world? The Sheikh looked rather surprised and he said, I am not the executioner. I am merely an instrument of God's justice. At which point Brother Andrew paused and then looked at him and said, what then is the place for forgiveness? And the Sheikh didn't bat an eyelid. He looked at him and said, that's only for those who deserve it. That's only for those who deserve it. And this young Palestinian lad looked at me and he said, in that 2-minute conversation, I realized how difficult it was to find a bridge between worldviews. In that 2-minute conversation, I found out how difficult it is. And ladies and gentlemen, even though we may say it lightheartedly and so on, I know there are issues today where one wrong word could completely destroy your future. One misspoken analogy can be taken the wrong way. But in our cultural struggles globally, we are dealing with issues of huge dimensions. And the fact that a university setting like this can be a venue to afford a discussion of this nature is a tribute to all of you. And so I want to thank you as a campus. Thank you for the organizers. And thank you for those who put in all of the hard work so that even if we disagree, we don't need to be disagreeable. My mother used to say when I was a young lad, once you've cut off a person's nose, there's no point giving them a rose to smell. And so I don't want to cut off any roses and then offer you cut off any noses and then give you a rose to smell. We hope we'll get the terminology right there. In the 1980s, sociologists like Daniel Yankelevich were writing about the cultural shift in dramatic ways. And in one of the leading publications, he was quoting Daniel Bell, the social thinker, and here's the way he defined culture. Culture is the effort to provide a coherent set of answers to the existential questions that confront all human beings in the passages of their lives. Okay? So culture is an effort to find not a disparate set of answers, but a coherent set of answers to the existential questions that confront all of us in the passage of our lives. Then he went on to say this, seeing where we were headed, a genuine cultural revolution then is one that makes a decisive break with the shared meanings of the past, particularly those that relate to the deepest questions of the purpose and the nature of human life. So a cultural revolution is underway when we are making a decisive break from the shared meanings of the past, particularly those deep questions that deal with the very purpose and nature of what human life is all about. So if it's an effort to find a coherent set of answers, and a cultural revolution takes place when we are taking a decisive break from the shared meanings of the past, then you know the more you get to the hard questions, if you calibrate them wrongly at ground level, to use an airplane analogy, if the calibration is wrong at the ground level, then the higher the altitude you fly to, the variance is going to be wider and wider and wider. And it's these culturally shared meanings that are now up for grabs, and the cultural revolution is now into its second or third generation. What was happening? I believe there were three sociological phenomena that was lying beneath the surface. I use this only as a scaffolding now to bring you to the point of what it is I think the deductions really are and wherein lie our answers. Many years ago, one of them wrote it in these words: first, dentistry was painless, then bicycles were chainless, and carriages were horseless, and many laws enforceless. Next, cookery was fireless, telegraphy was wireless, cigars were nicotineless, and coffee caffeineless. Soon oranges were seedless, the putting green was weedless, the proper diet fatless. New motor roads are dustless, the latest steel is rustless, our tennis courts are sodless, our new religion godless. All of a sudden, definitions are taking place without a transcendent perspective of any kind. And the three underlying sociological phenomena were as follows. Number one, the process of secularization. What is the process of secularization? It is the process by which religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations were deemed to have lost their social significance. Where religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations were considered to have lost their social significance. Yes, they could function, but in terms of the hard questions of meaning, essence, and destiny, they were put on the margin and not considered as serious voices in the shifting sands of the Cultural Revolution. How do we even illustrate something like that? Say you were discussing a serious social issue of our time, and you had a panel in front of you on television, and you're watching the program. And you see an academic, you see a psychologist, you see a lawyer, you see a medical practitioner, you see a philosopher of ethics, and you're listening to all that they have to say. You see a behavioral scientist and so on. And then all of a sudden you come to a pastor and his or her view on the subject. The way the sociological fabric was changing at the moment the religiously ordained person started to speak on the subject, he or she was assumed at that point to be prejudiced on the subject, as if all the others were completely objective on what they were dealing with. That's precisely what secularization actually meant. That religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations were losing their social significance. When you saw this kind of thing taking place, you began to see what it was that people were actually arguing for or arguing against. The secularization process was described well by British journalist Steve Turner. We believe in Marx, Freud, and Darwin. We believe everything is okay as long as you don't hurt anyone to the best of your definition of hurt and to the best of your definition of knowledge. We believe in sex before, during, and after marriage. We believe in the therapy of sin. We believe that adultery is fun. We believe that taboos are taboo. We believe that everything was getting better despite evidence to the contrary. The evidence had to be investigated, and you could prove anything with evidence. We believe there is something in horoscopes, UFOs, and bent spoons. Jesus was a good man just like Buddha, Muhammad, and ourselves. He was a good moral teacher, although we think his good morals were basically bad. We believe that all religions are basically the same. At least the ones that we read were. They all believe in love and goodness. They only differed on matters of creation, sin, heaven, hell, God, and salvation. We believe that after death comes the nothing, because when you ask the dead what happens, they say nothing. If death is not the end and the dead have lied, then it's compulsory heaven for all, excepting perhaps Hitler, Stalin, and Genghis Khan. We believe in Masters and Johnson. What's selected is average. What's average is normal. What normal is good. We believe in total disarmament. We believe there are direct links between warfare and bloodshed. Americans should beat their guns into tractors, and the Russians would be sure to follow. We believe that man is essentially good. It's only his behavior that lets him down. This is the fault of society. Society is the fault of conditions. Conditions are the fault of society. We believe that each man must find the truth that is right for him, and reality will adapt accordingly. The universe will readjust, history will alter. We believe that there is no absolute truth except the truth that there is no absolute truth. We believe in the rejection of creeds and the flowering of individual thought. And then he put this stinging postscript. If chance be the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky. And when you hear a state of emergency, sniper kills 10, youths go looting, bomb blasts school, it's but the sound of man worshiping his maker. If chance be the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky. And when you hear state of emergency, sniper kills 10, troops on rampage, youths go looting, bomb blast school, it's but the sound of man worshiping his maker. Now, I want to funnel this thought down to show to you what exactly the uppercase secularization process actually ends up doing. Now, again, you'll have a chance to respond to it or have it clarified or even counter it in the question that you raise. But here's what happens. When secularization has moved into the marketplace of ideas, where anything from a transcendent basis is evicted by virtue of the fact that it invokes some transcendent perspective, what ultimately happens? What ultimately happens? Where do we turn to for our definitions that are not ultimately self-referencing? This was proven many years ago when a leading pornographic purveyor, whose pornography was considered to be so vile that the man arguing against it said, look, it actually makes Playboy magazine and all look pretty tame, and we wouldn't even be here discussing that genre. We're talking about something heavily perverted here in the abuse and use of children and women and so on in ways that are totally dehumanizing and degrading. But the man who was arguing for the defense of this man's right to produce it had a very clever way in a secularized consciousness to shape his questions. And here's what he said to a witness who was witnessing against it. And he said to him, have you ever gone into an art gallery? And the man says, yes. Have you ever gone into an art gallery where there are paintings by the great masters? Yes. Have you ever gone in there where you see paintings of the great masters of unclothed people? Yes. Have you paid to go into such an art gallery? Yeah. Will you please explain to this jury why you called that art and why you call my client's stuff pornography? And he had many of them on the ropes, and in that kind of a setting, of course, you're not going to discuss the philosophy of art versus the philosophy of porn and so on. But as I would read the transcript of those and try to come to terms with it in my own mind, I thought to myself, you know what? This is not a new question for art vis-a-vis pornography. If you read the biography of Michelangelo, even the first time he started to paint disrobed people, he was put to the question by his teacher, who raised a very important question so that he would understand what his responsibility would be. He said, Michael, why are you doing this? Michelangelo said, because I want to see man as God sees man. And the teacher looked at him and said, but you're not God. And then the unfolding dialogue is fascinating to try and understand the difference of parameters and boundaries and, more importantly, purpose. But it reminded me of C.S. Lewis's book, in A Pilgrim's Regress, in which this is an extraordinary conversation. It's a fascinating book, and the reason Lewis portrayed it as a pilgrim's regress rather than his own progressive journey to Christ in his book called Surprised by Joy, he took this in an allegorical form in A Pilgrim's Regress. And the reason he calls it a regress is because on his journey through atheism and pantheism and all of the philosophies that his brilliant mind was wrestling with, and he was faced with why he was turning away from them, he couldn't quite put his finger to the nerve or what it was he was rejecting and why he was rejecting it, but he knew there was something systemically flawed in the worldviews that he was rejecting until he came to know Jesus Christ. In his testimony said, surprised by joy. And this brilliant Oxford scholar tells the story. Then he took a regressive journey, for he had more explanatory power to why he had rejected some and why he had trusted this particular one. And now in this allegorical journey, he is in the mountain called the Spirit of the Age, where everything goes. But fascinatingly, allegorically, Lewis, who refers to himself as John, pictures himself as handcuffed by the Spirit of the Age, not free, but bound. A brilliant metaphor of how absolute freedom can actually become a form of bondage in itself. And while he is bound in chains, he's looking at the neuronic stare of he who heads up the Spirit of the Age. And while he's talking to him, the waiter comes and serves him his breakfast, unbinds him. And young John takes a drink of milk and says, "This is very refreshing." And the man representing the Spirit of the Age says, "It is it? What do you call it?" He said, "Milk." He said, "It's only the secretion of a cow, isn't it?" He said, "A cow secretes urine, produces milk. What's the difference? Just the secretion of a cow." Young John says he didn't know how to respond to this. And then he made a big mistake on commenting on the tastiness of the eggs. And the waiter says, "You know what an egg is, don't you?" And he proceeds to give it the most debased description. And young John doesn't know how to respond to it. But he says, all of a sudden, after that man has gone, reason comes riding on a horse and rescues me and says to me, looks at the weight of the Spirit of the Age, and he says, "You lie, because you don't know the difference between what nature is meant for nourishment and what nature is meant for garbage. You don't know the difference between what nature is meant for nourishment and what nature is meant for refuse." Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to think that an average person standing in front of the lens of a camera, whose unclad body is being used by marketers of sensations to trap young minds and lock into their memory banks ideas that will haunt them the rest of their lives, and put at risk not only their hungers, but possibly the very sacredness of their vows and their marriages and so on. I would like to think that somebody who's being paid to do this would stop at a point and say, "Please don't do this to me. Don't do this to me." But you know what happens when secularization has its full run at things like this? It will ultimately cease to have the ability to define distinctives and could ultimately produce a generation without a sense of shame. Do you know, from what I understand, psychiatrists are dealing with a possibility of a medication that can counter post-traumatic stress disorders. Those who come from the battlefield and unable to sleep because of all of the trauma and so on. But the fear in the discussion committees is this: if we are able to find a drug that is so able to erase the memory of horrific things, to what end will that drug be put? To a rapist or a mass murderer who the morning after a series of crimes can just swallow the pill and not feel any sense of guilt whatsoever. This was precisely the path Hitler went on. Outside the gas chamber of Auschwitz are his words: "I want to raise a generation of young people devoid of a conscience, imperious, relentless, and cruel." And what I want to say to you is definitions are crucial in the earliest stages of sensitivity. And if secularization moves to the point of taking any transcendent notion out of discussion, and if religious ideas, institutions, interpretations, which the founding documents of this nation actually attributed the very sacredness of our rights to having been endowed by the Creator, what will that make of a society that has lost its sense of shame? That's why a philosopher of ethics says, ours is an age where ethics has become obsolete. It's superseded by science, deleted by psychology, dismissed as emotive by philosophy. It is drowned in compassion, evaporates into aesthetics, and retreats before relativism. The usual moral distinctions between good and bad are simply drowned in a maudlin emotion in which we feel more sympathy for the murderer than for the murdered, for the adulterer than for the betrayed, and in which we have actually begun to believe the real guilty party, the one who somehow caused it all, is the victim and not the perpetrator of the crime. The entire reversal that has taken place when shame and remorse of this nature have gone.
The RZIM Church Leaders Conference is going to address the most timely challenges Christianity is facing. You can attend here in person, or you can register to watch by live stream on rzim.org. We have an incredible lineup of speakers, including Ravi Zacharias, Louis Giglio, John Lennox, Crawford Loritz, Michael Ramsden, Abdu Murray, Sam Alberry, and Joe Vitale. So please join us from October 3rd to the 5th. I hope to see you soon.
People are interested in having a spiritual life, but treat faith more like an a la carte menu at a restaurant, choosing what they like and dismissing the rest. Cutting through the hype and seduction is the clear voice of author and apologist Ravi Zacharias in his book, Why Jesus? Rediscovering His Truth in an Age of Mass-Marketed Spirituality. Ravi answers the attraction known as the New Spirituality. Billy Graham calls Why Jesus a powerful defense of how Jesus Christ brings meaning and hope to an individual life. And Charles Swindoll says, I'm not acquainted with a brighter mind or a more relevant and devoted defender of the faith than Ravi Zacharias. Why Jesus is available in bookstores now or online at rzim.org.
The purpose of RZIM is to engage meaningfully with the questions and heartfelt issues of our culture. We do that in areas of business, academia, politics, the arts, and media. We live in an age of confusion, and people from every continent are beginning to wonder whether there are any answers to life's biggest questions. And RZIM consists of over 50 speakers and adjuncts operating in over 20 countries, working at every level to reach those who shape the culture of a country and its future direction with the gospel. In addition to taking the gospel to various arenas of influence, we are also committed to providing a variety of training events in order to meet people where they are and to answer their questions directly. Whether it's engaging young adults and students through Reboot, Remind, and Big Deal questions, or the training we offer through the OCCA, RZIM Academy, and the New Zacharias Institute. Our purpose is not only to increase people's knowledge, but to address the obstacles that stop people from seeing the credibility and beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
God alone knows how to humble us without humiliating us and to exalt us without flattering us.
You've been watching Let My People Think with Dr. Ravi Zacharias. We're grateful for your prayers and financial support. If you'd like to know more about this ministry or would like to donate to our efforts, you can call us at 1-800-448-6766.